Okay, live. Uh, Still working on this, but it's better than the 15-minute delay from the other day. So there's a lot to talk about. I have the big board up, but I'm not sure how well it's going to work out with this software that I'm using. But let's go ahead and start. I have unlimited content as I've been. Hey Daniel, it's good to see you again. As I've been recording more and more, reading more comments, listening to podcasts, just more and more ideas are flowing through. There's so much content to go over. So let's actually get started, and I'll go ahead and see if I can interact with this. Interact. Yeah. So the first thing, the heading, the title, the headline here. Are reporters chickens? So when you look at the reporters, and Kawhi's press conference made me think of this. A lot of them are very hesitant to ask questions. In fact, you rarely see this, especially in NBA or any other controlled environment. Let's think of the UFC as well. They're not going to ask any questions that are disliked by, in the UFC's case, the Dana White, or in the NBA's case, when you have the teams, they're just not going to go for it. It's understandable because their jobs are at stake. So if they did ask the questions, right? If you did have a Pablo Torre Jr. in the audience, how long would Pablo Torre Jr. be in the audience? He'd be gone. So it's not, maybe they are, but it's not known just because they're there asking questions that are safe and neutral. Yesterday, so I got to rewatch the beginning of the Clippers press conference where you saw Kawhi Leonard, and I think he got three questions. One was from Ramona Shelburne, and I think two were from two other people. And you didn't see the, like, a really insistence on the questions. You just saw Ramona ask one question and a follow up, and then another question was general, and it's just not going to happen, right? Because otherwise they're not going to be a media member of the team. They're not going to be a beat writer. So it'd have to be some type of event where you have independents joining in, but otherwise, you're just not going to get the questions from reporters. And it happened with I remember the Spurs. Greg Popovich, of course, he had so many people afraid to ask questions, and they wouldn't. And so what happens now is reporters they really, when they want to ask something that can potentially conflict with the prevailing views of the institution, whoever it is, then they'll really back into it gently. So they'll bring up the topic but not address it specifically. And they won't even ask directly. It's more like they'll broach the topic and then ask what their thoughts are on something or generally. So they usually they usually vacillate with it. They're getting around to it. You can see what they're trying to ask, but they're usually doing it in the most in the most indirect way possible. But I think that. I was thinking about this today because I was thinking about the Clippers press conference, and I thought it was a good topic. But I think just the reporters are in a tough position because if they're going to be bold, if they're going to ask the strong questions, then they're not going to be reporters anymore. But let's see if I can tab down and we can go to the next bullet point. Clippers punishment betting lines. So this one's an interesting one. I would like to see what y'all think on this one, but I didn't know what to put here, but I think the in between punishment is my favorite, and I have it as a -110. So the in between punishment would be if we're going to go, well, we can't find evidence that the Clippers did this, but we also don't like what's going on here. This just doesn't feel right, and so the NBA comes up with some type of middle ground. And I see this as, I have this as the early favorite. It's really hard to tell what the NBA is going to do just because there's not a lot of directions here given the Pablo's evidence. Daniel writes, it's no different than Windhorst and crew. They're completely scared of the topic, dancing around the topic. Yeah, we've seen this over and over again, and you could tell it's just like if it was an organic reaction, then they would have a more like open conversation. There wouldn't be a need to go one direction or the other or to immediately dismiss it. When I saw Stephen A's reaction, the guy that's supposed to be so opinionated and never holds back, definitely a mild reaction. Let's look into it. He starts off with Steve Ballmer is a good man, and then he zeroed in on his target, who was Kawhi. So he was on the story, right? And he was looking at one of the players in the story, but he wasn't really going right at it. So we've seen this in so much of the media. And what I was thinking of, though, is when they're at the press conferences, they have the chance to ask questions, and we just don't see them ask the questions. But going back to the Clippers betting line, and then I have a plus 220. I don't think it's hard for me to imagine the Clippers not being punished, but I can definitely see that happening, to where the NBA is just like, we looked at all of the evidence, and in the end, we just couldn't come up with anything definitive linking the Clippers here. And so really taking that, like, the beyond a reasonable doubt approach, to where you'd have to have everything in place for the NBA to actually punish the Clippers. And so I think that's a real possibility, though. I think it is a very much in play, given how much the reaction that we've seen from the NBA so far. And when I say NBA, I mean Adam Silver. All right, let's go to the next point. So I wish the stream software had a better ability for me to show you a browser. I'll still work through that. I think I can eventually get to the point, or I can just upgrade the software. But there's a clip, and it's like a random clip. I just saw it, and it was on Reddit, and then I've seen it on YouTube, and I don't even know, I didn't even see the show it was from. But there's Kevin Garnett, and there is Adam Sandler, and there's Bill Simmons, and they're at a table, and Bill Simmons states something to the effect of Shaquille was out of shape, and Kevin Garnett then goes at him. And what Kevin Garnett ended up coming to was that because Shaquille O'Neal wasn't, like, completely out of shape, like, relative to anybody, that he wasn't actually out of shape. And so that was a ridiculous take by Kevin Garnett, but he went strong at Bill Simmons. And because of that, I write here, I need a stronger response from Bill. So Bill just mentioned Kobe. And he said, like, something like, well, Kobe said, he should have said no. I mean, this is something he should have stuck to. Because Shaquille O'Neal was for sure out of shape. And then Kevin Garnett was saying you can't average 25 and 12. You surely can, especially when you're a 7'1", 420 pounds. You definitely can average 25 and 12. There was nobody that could stop Shaquille physically. He was lifting, like, if you watch, there's a clip you can find where he's backing down Dikembe Mutombo in the finals when the Lakers played the Sixers, and as he's backing down Dikembe, he's literally uprooting him. He's literally lifting him up off the floor. He could average that many points being completely out of shape. Daniel wrote, those odds are pretty spot on, but if Pablo has 2 more bullets in that gun, yeah, it might be closer to 3 plus 350. That's why I think it'd be interesting. If FanDuel and Draftkings actually had lines, it would be really interesting to see their lines and then watch the line movement as Pablo comes out with more information. But with the Kevin Garnett thing, I saw that clip, and with Bill Simmons, I know it's not really Bill Simmons' way to be confrontational and, like, just go right at somebody. But Kevin Garnett, for some reason, it looked like he wanted to go at Bill Simmons because his take was asinine. You can absolutely be out of shape. How many out of shape players have we seen? So Luka, Zion, and the list goes on. And, Kevin Garnett ended up coming back to, well, he wasn't just completely out of shape. He wasn't huffing and puffing. And he knew what Bill Simmons meant. So he obviously wanted to go at Bill Simmons there. I don't know why, but I did think it was a notable clip. But I thought it was a strange, like, it's just strange for him to be at that table with Bill and then go directly at him. But that does lead to something I would like to see. When Bill had Pablo on one-on-one in the studio, there's something there that cannot be replaced. It's just that in-person physical tension that you're watching. That's much better than watching 2 people who are disconnected and they're both talking on Zoom or whatever it is. That's not nearly as compelling as when you have 2 people, especially people where it doesn't necessarily have to mean that they're, they want to fight each other or anything, but just like people that genuinely have a disagreement. You have them in person, and then you watch how that disagreement unfolds. When Bill Simmons had Pablo in studio, you saw that he just didn't want it. He didn't want to really have he didn't want there to be any type of I can't come up with the word, but he just didn't want to be too disagreeable. So right away he was already saying like, let's go ahead and just address this, and he just didn't want to go back and forth with Pablo, but he should have more given his earlier stance when there was that rewatchables episode. So another bullet point, and I'm actually going through these fairly fast, but we'll continue on because I have so much content to get through even after the last bullet point. But the NFL is fragile. So one other thing that keeps coming to mind, especially when Roger Goodell the other day, he posted out there, or he had the quote like he was open to renegotiation. So basically stating, hey, I want to renegotiate this contract because we realized we could have got more, or right now in this environment we could potentially get more if we were renegotiating right now. And one thing it reminded me of, if I'm a media partner, is that the NFL is extremely fragile. So when you sign a contract with the NFL, you're not just signing up for it's not just you're getting the playing, you're just getting the NFL and all of its views. You're also signing up for the risk that the NFL has inherent in the league because the sport is so violent. Everybody knows the sport is violent, but all it takes is one death on the field or one extremely serious injury. And I add extremely because, of course, players are injured all of the time. But something that really looks bad on the field, and that can completely change. And I didn't even see Hill's injury, by the way. I haven't watched a lot of NFL. The only game I've caught for a decent portion is the Dallas Cowboys and Packers game. I was definitely disappointed that the Packers didn't do better in that one. Surprised by the Cowboys. But yeah, like if the NFL has a real serious injury, and I just think back to Tua, I can't pronounce his last name, but I think back to Tua's injury, and his injury was that on that magnitude that I'm getting at. It's just, if you have more of these, then the NFL is going to really have a backlash, right? We've seen it before, and the NFL has really avoided that extreme downside so far, but it's there, it's present, and it could easily happen. And so if I'm a media partner, I'm thinking, one, I'm not renegotiating, but two, when there is a deal, we've got to factor in not just all of your views, but the potential that your views could submarine for a while until people forget about the serious injury. So I think when Roger Goodell is looking to renegotiate, you're not always going to get that premium, and you're not always going to get it for more than one reason. It's really, really risky. It's inevitable at this point. We're going to see another serious injury. How are people going to react? And is the NBA going to be able to maintain that viewership? Or are people collectively going to start thinking, you know what, maybe I don't want to buy into the NFL as much as I had. Maybe I still watch, but maybe it's not the same if a player dies on the field, or we have another very traumatic injury, or someone has a traumatic injury after the game is played. So it's very real. If you're a media partner, this is a very, very real possibility. So another note is, with going back to the Clippers, we have Kawhi Leonard, and he is not going to get, he's going to miss out on some money, right? We're not going to see any, there is no more potential for salary cap circumvention. It's actually too bad that this didn't happen. He wasn't caught earlier in his career. But he is, thanks to the what appears to be lengthy, the lengthy investigation by the Wachtell law firm, he is going to somewhat get paid before any potential, what did they call it last time, where they void his contract. Any potential voiding of his contract, he has until after the All-Star break, because according to, I think, Spot Track, they had a bit from, it looked like it was a placed release from the NBA, but regardless, they said it wasn't expected that there'd be a decision until after the All-Star break. So all of this time, Kawhi is getting paid until, if there is a voiding of the contract, then he would lose that money. So he's going to get it probably over $25 million, because he's due approximately 50 this season and then 50 next. But that's looking at this in the light of, he is going, if he does get his contract void, he might not get it voided. If the NBA leans to where they're already leaning and they just continue on with that, or they don't go as extreme with the punishment, then he could avoid having that money taken away. But as of now, it's very. Kawhi stands to lose a lot of money through this. We've seen aspiration. He's not going to get paid there. There's going to be no more workarounds. But he is at the end of his career, so he probably wasn't going to be getting too many of those, had too many of those left. Okay, so another thing I started looking to is Meadowlark Media. So if you recall, Meadowlark is the media company that is associated with Pablo, and I finally spent like 20 minutes on my phone just looking at what is Meadowlark Media exactly? What are they doing? Who is involved? So from what I can gather, you have Pablo Torre now, who is like the prize, the talent, like right? He's the franchise player, and Pablo actually has an equity stake in Meadowlark Media. So wait, voiding Kawhi's contract would be doing the Clippers a favor. Yeah, it would be. It depends. I think the Clippers actually want him because he's still like he's still that placeholder star. So I think it depends on his contract being voided whether or not it's a favor to the Clippers. I think Steve Ballmer actually thinks is hopeful they're able to retain Kawhi. The other part of it is if they don't retain Kawhi, what are their options, right? There's not a lot there. So at best they could trade him, and then what are you going to get for Kawhi Leonard, who can barely play as is? So I don't know. I think I've actually looked at that, and I think it can go either way. Whether it just depends on what your outlook is on Kawhi and the Clippers. But as far as Meadowlark Media, this is a Dan Lebatard operation, and initially he had John Skipper as CEO, and Skipper left, and he's left somewhat recently, and then we've had Pablo on there for a while. So Pablo comes from ESPN. Pablo still has some ESPN ties, and he was recently on one segment with Tony Kornheiser, and I can't remember the name of it. But Pablo is their star, and now the Meadowlark Media's stock has risen, of course, because of all of this. And it looks like they have a podcast division, and then they have their documentaries vision. Now, I don't recognize any of the documentaries, but with the podcast, obviously there's Pablo, there's Dan Lebatard. What is this? The show, Dan Lebatard's show, and then there's other properties. I think Stu Gatz is in there. I know I've heard of Stu Gatz's name just because of Dan Lebatard, but I don't know who he is really. But it's something I've been looking into more because I think before we saw this rise in Pablo was always looked at as the up and comer, the potential star. And then what's happened now is he's fulfilled that. Now they really have something, right? Now you have something that Meadowlark Media can build off of. And then the question is, how much further does Pablo go? And so I wonder, it'd be interesting to know how much equity he has in Meadowlark. But as it is, Meadowlark's obviously their outlook has completely changed as a result of all of this. So I'm very random if you can't tell. Like going through the big board here, what is the Clippers' defense? There's no wrong answers, and I think this is a question I would pose to anybody here. Is like anybody that watches this, what actually is the Clippers' defense? Because we see a lot of evidence from Pablo, and we've seen the defense from Mark Cuban, and there are some other defenders out there. But what actually, if you're the Clippers and you're working through this, like it's a great thought experiment, what are you actually going to do? And I'm just now realizing that my speakers. I was wondering what I heard. That was someone outside. What are you actually going to do as the Clippers? And I don't think there's a good. I've tried this exercise. I was going to post a video on it. I couldn't come up with anything beyond like the Stonewall defense, where, hey, we are not involved in Kawhi's contract, and on our side, we just continually invested because obviously it was in our interest to make sure that aspiration continued on and did not fail. So if you are the Clippers, what are you doing right now? And there are no wrong answers, especially when you look at what the Clippers have come up with. They haven't been able to. The Clippers haven't come up with anything good of them by themselves. So yeah, I'm surprised at media day that the Clippers didn't have a better stance, and we saw Steve Ballmer not show up. But what would be the defense, right? That is the question that I think, if anybody can answer that, it would be interesting to try to undermine what Pablo has put forth. The confusion defense, throw everything against the wall. That's the one Mark Cuban is going with. I posted a video on Mark Cuban last night, and Mark has posted in volume on Twitter, and he's just trying everything, and it's not working. It's actually nonsensical. I would have to actually read through it and go through it slowly to try to extract what the meaning is, because it's not obvious. When you listen to Pablo, the evidence is obvious. When you look at Mark Cuban's Twitter, I don't know what he's going at or going for. So I would have to actually invest time in reading his tweets, but there's not a lot there. But so far, the Clippers haven't come up with anything either. So I think that is their best route. Their best option here is to just not have anything more in the not have anything more that you're going. No more statements. They've already done enough. Nothing is helping them. The only reason they should be posting more statements is if something is actually helping them. Nothing that the Clippers are coming out with is swaying any type of public opinion. Every time it just comes off as disingenuous, not believable, et cetera, et cetera. So the Clippers haven't done themselves any favor. But that's what I keep coming back to, is like I always try to put myself. I obviously, Pablo's evidence is very strong, but like on the other side, if I'm looking at this from the other point of view, what am I going to do as the Clippers? And I would point to the 4 years, Kawhi's contract over 4 years. I would point to a few like the Uncle Dennis text to the Clippers, but there's not a lot, and even so, a lot of it is weak and it's undermined by Pablo's other evidence. All right, we'll come back to the Clippers, but I want to keep going. And I think this is actually the last item I have for on the big board, but I do have more because I want to look at the ringer in a moment. That's also something I've been looking into. But I recently saw a T-Mobile commercial, and T-Mobile referenced the big guys. So they didn't say AT&T, they didn't say Verizon. They referenced them as the big guys, and it just made me wonder, like, okay, why at this point they've spent so many billions of dollars in advertising? I think you can give it to them. I think you can reference them, and it won't be a big deal because they're more known than I think T-Mobile is known. And then with FanDuel and Draftkings, it's the same thing when you see the references, the generic references to FanDuel and Draftkings. Maybe someone doesn't have a sponsorship and they're just like, one of those other betting sites. It was something that I think of because a lot of times, and this happens all the time with on YouTube and everywhere, people won't acknowledge you until they think they're on the same level or close to the same level. And so they can't actually say your name because they don't want to give you any spotlight. I understand it to a degree, but I would rather just say it because everybody already knows what you're saying. If you're using the generic terms, then everybody already knows, and you might as well go ahead and say it. But the T-Mobile commercial the other night, and I think it must have been on the Cowboys game because I don't usually watch TV, but I saw that and I was like, you can just say it, right? T-Mobile, like AT&T and Verizon are more known than you. But now let's talk about the Ringer. So the Ringer is a future podcast episode. I will get to this, but there's a podcast about the Bill Simmons podcast. It's very interesting. It's our Bill Simmons, and I listened to the second episode. The first episode I listened to was the emergency pod on Ryan Russillo leaving, and then I picked up with the latest episode, which is Bill Simmons. I don't remember the title, but it's Bill Simmons losing his fastball. And I thought it was funny because they talked about Bill Simmons in a way that he talks about athletes. It's like he's past his prime. He's no longer, he no longer has this gear. And you had two guys that had studied Bill Simmons, and I mean not studied him, but they know him. They've watched him. They're familiar with him, and they were talking about how he wasn't as interesting to them. He wasn't as good to them. They also talked about how his guest alliance with cousin Sal wasn't as interesting anymore, and it was I was surprised. I've just come across this, and the other thing that's I think interesting to me is I'm learning more behind the scenes by listening to them, and it's also confirming some of the things that I've thought just as someone who I don't really I don't pay too much a close I don't pay too close of attention to what's going on. I only like when I listen to Bill Simmons, I don't usually have an idea, or I'm not even thinking about what's going on around Bill Simmons. I'm just paying attention to what actually the content of the podcast is. But as I'm listening to our Bill Simmons, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I've thought the same thing, and it's one of those aspects where there's no there's no scoreboard. You don't know what's happening with Bill Simmons on a day-to-day basis. Like no one's keeping track of the podcast stats for Bill Simmons, but at the same time, I think there is a definite difference from when Bill Simmons started to where he is now. Let's see. So Daniel wrote, Bill was always pushing the envelope, so to see him fade into middle age without being interesting is depressing. He used to be one of my favorites. Me too. I mean, he might still be my favorite because I don't listen to that many. I listen to, of podcasts I regularly listen to, he is the one. He is the one I actually regularly listen to. I would say the next is Zach Lowe. And what I like about Bill is that he is just he's going over things, and he's not too much into the analytics, but also I think he's lost some of his critical analysis to where now he's paying attention to so many things. I think it's especially bad at this time because he's spread too thin, and so it comes back and it really shows up in the podcast. So I've thought, just independently, I don't talk to anybody about the Bill Simmons podcast. Obviously now I'm reading more comments, but I've thought, put the Clippers scandal to the side. I thought that he wasn't covering the subjects as much. He wasn't talking about the subjects that I thought he would be or should be talking about. And that's in part why restarted this podcast. So I have videos dating back over, I think, nearly 2 years at this point. But I picked up again because I was like, look, like I one of the things I thought was Bill Simmons doesn't cover this. I don't know who does. I would, if I was seeking out a podcast, I would want to hear this type of information covered in depth. And a lot of times Bill Simmons will just go over things. He'll gloss over things that I think are relevant and worthy of at least talking about, right? You have this 1 hour to an hour and a half podcast, and you're not going to cover certain things. Like, to me, it just, why can't we just go through this? Why do we have to end this so soon? That's one of the point about podcasts that I dislike is when, and you see this especially with ESPN. I think this is why ESPN cannot gain any traction in sports, is they don't actually cover a topic. Do we have to meet these arbitrary 5-minute segment rules, or like when you even talk about TV, it's like 2-minute segments? And you're not going to be able to get anything substantial in 30 seconds. So if you just let people talk, I think this is one of the things that NBA and TNT does well. But if you just let people talk, then you can actually have something that's engaging and interesting to hear. But with Bill Simmons, I think there are so many things that he's not covering, so many things that he goes through too fast. And I think there's multiple factors happening at once. So it's the other difficult part about this is just like feel, right? Like no one's sitting there and actually keeping track of the statistics for podcasts, but it would be interesting to know, hey, this is where Bill Simmons has, like, this is the decline. But I definitely sense it. But he is still my favorite. I actually saw Bill in person, and that I think was an amphitheater. That amphitheater was filled. Like, there were people. It was capacity it was at capacity. So I mean, people are still very much interested in him, but I just don't think that he's bringing the same. He's not bringing the same to every podcast now, and I think it's also like I don't even know how he's able to cover as much content as he does. I guess with the movies, um, there's not you're really just talking back through a movie you've already seen. I couldn't even remember the movies, but um, I did watch. Someone said to watch rewatchables. I'd never watched it. I watched 13 minutes of it, and it was it was about what I expected. It was like Bill Simmons and three others talking through Silence of the Lambs, which is a movie I especially like, and it still wasn't. I was like, okay, I get it, and it's you get to go through some of the fine points, but I just wouldn't care. Like it's not something I would care about. I would rather rewatch the actual movie. But with sports, I do want to see what he has, and he's just not it's not coming across the same, and it didn't come across the same towards the end of Russillo's tenure. And then of course he also he had Zach Lowe, and he and Zach Lowe been they haven't been together as much as I thought they would be. But then again, the NBA season hasn't started, so maybe we will see more Bill plus Zach going forward. But it is a very much a contrast in style because Zach really wants to go. I mean, Zach is the one guy that's actually in the film room, right? Sitting there in his hotel room watching replays of the Hornets and the Pistons so that he could know all of the pick and roll action, etc. And Bill Simmons is the guy that's got five TVs on and he's talking to someone else and he is looking at the highlights and then he's extracting that takeaway. So it's two very contrasting styles. I think sometimes they mesh and sometimes they don't. So it doesn't work out all the time, but I do think that the Ringer is at an interesting place. They were so easy to pull for when Bill started, and he's amassed something very, very impressive. But when it comes to present day, and we're looking at the end product, there's not the it's not what you I don't think it's Bill's podcast is fine, but it's on the decline slightly. But then the other podcasts, I haven't seen a lot to make me really want to watch those and just pay attention to them on an ongoing basis. But I've covered everything now on the big board, and I was planning on doing a Ringer podcast. This might stay as my Ringer podcast, but Daniel, thanks for joining. Thanks for chatting. Thanks for everyone else who joined in and watched. And I think I'm going to end this here, but more streams are to come.